Well, hello again. And in the last podcast I recorded, I spoke a little bit about the dive that I made to the wreck of the Titanic back in 2001, and I spoke a little bit about what it was like to get on board the ship and essentially the launch sequence of the academic Keldysh in Meal One. So I was in Meal One, and then discovering the bow section when we were down there, and also just a word or two about what it was like on that descent. So I'll just sort of pick things up from where I was last time. Um, One thing I'll say is it was pretty pretty cold down there. So the external sea temperature, the water temperature, is about 3 degrees Celsius. So when we were doing the launch, when we were on deck, I had full length underwear on, thermal underwear, and we also had these coveralls which they gave us for the dive. And I had thick socks on. As I mentioned, I might have mentioned when we were getting on board, we had to take our shoes off. So that's kind of what we're wearing in there. Well, when we were on board the ship, getting ready to go, it was actually quite warm, and we're all kind of pretty much stripped to the waist in there. Myself, Anatoly, and Lyle, the guy from Texas. And however, once we were launched and going down, things did cool off pretty quickly. So I was quite thankful for having this sort of thick clothing. Now, what happened as we were down there is that obviously 2.5 hours going down, and then we were on the bottom for 6 hours, and then another 2.5 hours going back. That's quite a long amount of time for the submarine to be in that cold water. So as you can imagine, the moisture in our breath began to condense on the metal surfaces. So there were quite a few of those in the sub. And certainly towards the end of the dive, I remember looking at the portholes. So we've got these circular portholes in front of us. Now, there was a large one, it was about 12 inches in front of Anatoly, and then we had 7 inches sort of either side of his. So on the two benches where we were sitting or lying either side of Anatoly, we had our own little porthole. These things were actually plastic, kind of acrylic wedges, because of the pressure of the water outside, it pushes the portholes inward. And my understanding is if they were made of glass, they'd shatter under the pressure. So we're looking through these little wedges, but because they're circular, there's like a sill that there's they don't come. They're not right up against the inside edge of the submarine. So in these sills, there'd be water forming. So I was actually mopping it up from time to time, and there's condensation everywhere. And certainly when we were going up to get back to surface, it was dripping on me a bit. So it was a bit sort of cold and damp in there. However, back on the bottom of the Atlantic. So I spoke last time about going around the bow section, and we did the exploration. We drove around and we saw the anchor. We saw some of the divots for the lifeboat. So obviously, knowing they had been used, and one of them was collapsed, we saw all of that stuff. We saw Captain Smith's bathroom that was kind of open, so you could see his bathtub in there, and the photographs from Ballard's voyage. I've seen that photograph as well, but yeah, I was able to look out of the window and see the bathtub there. There's nothing really left of the wheelhouse that was torn off. So there is a telemotor there, which is how to describe that? It's just like a column. It's a bit like a kind of vertical steering column that you would having in kind of an older truck or an old steam engine, something like that. But anyway, vertical column that the wheel was attached to, and of course all of that stuff's gone, and all that's left of where the wheelhouse stood, the front of the wheelhouse, is a sort of block that the presumably the superstructure bolted into. So that's all gone, and obviously it was quite emotional, I guess, in a way, to be at the spot where they were trying to save the ship, where they realized they were in trouble, and they were doing their best to save the ship, obviously without success. And the other thing that we saw was the mast where the lookouts were located. Now, the crow's nest itself is gone. I think that was taken away during one of the salvage operations. They took that away, but you can still see the opening. So that particular, I guess you call it a mast, but it's a hollow tube essentially, and the guys would climb up the inside, and there was a hatchway which was open, and that would lead into the crow's nest, and that's where the two lookouts were, who only saw the iceberg too late. And it was kind of a bizarre. I don't know if you know the story of the collision and how it happened. It was just a whole bunch of odd things came together at the same time. So that particular night on the ocean, it was absolutely flat, and I haven't spent a hell of a lot of time at sea. Pardon my language. I haven't spent an awful lot of time at sea, but I have been out once or twice when it's been flat calm, and it's really weird because it's like just being on a lake or on a mill pond, and that was what it was like that particular night. And the way that the guys would identify an iceberg, particularly where there was, I don't believe there's any moon either. So they would look for surf coming off the bottom of the iceberg caused by waves breaking against it. Of course, there's no waves in that situation. And that was why they were so close to the iceberg before they even saw it. And also there was the story about the binoculars, I think, had been locked away, and so they didn't have binoculars up there and all this sort of thing. So it was there's a whole bunch of things went wrong. That's just a short part of it. And in fact, it even had more passengers on it than it was intended, because there was another liner that had passengers on, but the Titanic was very undersold on the maiden journey, fortunately. And there was also a coal shortage, so rather than sail the two liners, they put the passengers from this other liner onto the Titanic, which I guess they were probably regretting. Anyway, so we did circle around. Obviously, in a submarine, you're able to circle around and have a good look around the ship. And we had a good look around the bow section, and then headed off. I think it's about 1.5, 2 k's between the bow section and the stern, because it broke up at the surface, and it's 2.5 miles, so roughly 4 k's from the surface to the ocean floor. Although the bow section kind of planed straight down, the stern section was a different kettle of fish altogether, because when the ship broke, on the stern section you've got all these open decks, and there was a lot of air in there, there's boilers, there's all sorts. So as it was going down, it was rotating. All of these decks are tearing apart. There's pockets of air, which as they go deeper, the air's kind of exploding out of the ship. It's finding a way out because it's trying to get out more. Some of the boilers were falling out. The engines were essentially falling out of the thing. So you end up with this debris field, which has thousands of artifacts in it, which range from some bottles. I saw some bottles down there. Plates, there was a door. I saw what was left of a door anyway. It was mostly gone. All of these things that had fallen out. We even came across one of the, I think it was one of the reciprocating engines, which are, if I can remember correctly, about 5 stories high. So all of this stuff is in this debris area. And the other really odd thing, I was talking about the wildlife, the fish a little bit last time, and the crabs and things, and where there were cables. I've got pictures of 1 or 2 crabs on cables. And the really odd thing were the sponges that have attached themselves to lumps of coal, because there was obviously an awful lot of coal on board, and a lot of that spilled out onto the ocean floor. And what you see is a thing like, how can I describe it? It's like a long white feather, a tall white feather, like an ostrich feather, attached to this coal with a lump of chewing gum is what it looks like, but it's obviously the sponge anchoring itself. So all of this stuff is down there, and I think the thing that struck me the most, because we were moving relatively quickly through the debris field, we were actually going at about 3 knots, so 3 nautical miles an hour, which is actually quite fast for that kind of a submarine. And I bought a rubber hood for my camera so I could place it right against the perspex of the little porthole I had, without doing any damage, obviously. And I was shooting pictures as fast as I could as we were traveling through, and but also looking out of the window myself. And one thing I missed on the photographs, but really just stuck with me, was seeing a pair of boots on the ground. And obviously, for a pair of boots to be together at that depth meant that whoever was in them was still in them when they hit the ocean floor. So, many poignant moments to think about the people who were on that ship and who didn't get off, and what they must have gone through and what it must have been like. And certainly, speaking as someone who's travelled a lot, and I've flown most of what I've done. I've done a few ferry trips and that sort of thing in New Zealand and in the Mediterranean and places like that. But um, the ocean liners were the mass transport of the day, and that would have been the kind of transport, if I'd been doing anything remotely like what I've been able to do in the last few years, that would have been my method of transport. So it did bring it home quite a lot. So it felt quite personal. So we got to the bow section, and yeah, we were able to look around there. So in the end, I didn't get to see the propellers. We did get really close to getting caught up on a bit of the bow section because there's an awful lot of jagged metal sticking out there. And at that point, we decided to go up. But while we were driving around there, we saw the second mirror, because at one point we stopped to have our lunch. So we had some sandwiches and had our lunch down there, and orange juice and things like that. And the Mir 2 came down, and that was really strange because we were parked just on the ocean floor, because the sub has these little skids on the bottom, so you can just park it. Obviously, for somewhere to how it parks on the deck as well. And we're in this complete darkness, other than our own lights, what's been illuminated by our lights, and then saw these other lights appearing, some distance from us, and that was Mir 2 coming down, which had an American couple in it. They were the second dive of the day, so that was really strange seeing them. And of course, the other question, I suppose, is the bathroom situation. so that's usually what people ask about. So yeah, if you needed to pee, there was a sort of bottle thing. Although I never used it. I mean, it's quite strange actually, being 11 hours and being relatively cold. But yeah, I didn't have to go. There was you could actually do the other option, but that they gave you it's supposed to be a sort of special diet to minimize the need for that. Anyway, all I can say is that on our dive, nobody needed the bathroom, so we were all in pretty good shape. Being 20 years older now, I doubt that would be the case. But anyway, on that occasion, it was all good. So so we went around obviously started with the bow section, went through the debris field, went up to the stern section, and drove around that, and then we headed back up, and again, not much to do. Anatoly was playing his Russian country music, and so if you hated country music, you're in real trouble, because there's nowhere to go in that submarine. But if not, it was all good. But yeah, it was nice. We chatted as well. We spoke about different things. What I hadn't realised was that, and this I found out on the way down. We were talking, and Nautil hadn't dived that year, and in fact, the company doing the salvage. So I mentioned that Nautil was involved in the salvage of items from the wreck, and there was a salvage contract. And I don't know the details of it, other than it was due to expire. Basically, to keep it current, they had to go and retrieve at least one item from the debris field in order to maintain the salvage contract. And basically, the Nautil hadn't been down that year, so we were talking about that on the way down. And then as we were yakking, we sort of realised, or it dawned on me, that we were the first dive of the year. And then when we got down there, as I related in the previous podcast, I was the first person to actually see the ship. It happened to come up on my side. So that does actually give me my claim to fame. So that makes me, because it was 2001, made me the first person to see the Titanic in 2001, which is that year, decade, century, millennium. So yeah, I must get that as a tattoo or something. But anyway, that was an odd thing that came out of that. Now, the other thing that we would do is on board the ship, we have these styrofoam cups, and so they're just regular styrofoam coffee cups that you'd be familiar with. We had those, and what we would do, we would write on them. We'd get out in the morning before a dive, or even the night before. And we'd write things like, hello, mum, from, the coordinates, and sketch a quick bit of Titanic on and all of that. And then what they would do, they would collect them all up in this big, like a bag. It was like a net bag. And the crew would attach these cups to the submarines so that when they went down, they're sort of stuck on the submarine, on the side of the submarine. But basically, as they go down, all the because the styrofoam is obviously mostly air, all of that, they get completely crushed. So what comes back are these tiny little cups that are a little bit distorted, but they still got the little messages on. So I had quite a few of them at one point, but as I was traveling around, I gave them to people, and now I don't have any at all. So I'm hoping one of my friends or whatever has one still. But yeah, that was kind of the fun thing to do. And also on that trip, we had a lot of lectures from guys who knew the story of the Titanic very well. We also had Don Walsh with us. Now, Don, if you've never heard of him, Don did the deepest ever dive back in 1960 in the bathyscaphe, which is it's almost like a hot air balloon, but it's designed for undersea. So it's got like this big petrol tank. It looks a little bit like an airship, and then underneath it hangs this spherical pressure sphere. So the top part is actually made of it's full of petrol, which is the buoyancy, and then there's this sphere on the bottom, which is the where the people go, and then there's a kind of tube from the top of the sphere up to the top of the bathyscaphe, and they climb down the little ladder into the sphere. So Don was one of two people. Jacques Piccard was the other one, a Swiss guy, and his company had designed and I think built the bathyscaphe. It was, I think, funded by the US Navy. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but it was definitely launched off a US Navy ship in 1960. And so Don, as a very young lieutenant at the time, did this amazing dive in a place called Challenger Deep in the Pacific, which is 7.5 miles deep, and it's the deepest place on the planet. So you may have heard of it because James Cameron went there a few years ago now. He had a ship that was, I think, built in Sydney, actually. I know I was trying to do a bit of work anyway, with the Sydney company who's involved in the construction of the submarine. But that is the deepest spot on the Earth, this 7.5 mile deep area. So it was an absolute amazing experience to have Don there, because I remembered as a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, seeing these magazines, and somebody had done an artist's impression. And I remember it really clearly of the bathyscaphe on the ocean floor with these amazing kind of this amazing vegetation down there, peculiar looking fish, and this artist had obviously let his mind really go crazy about what might have been down there. So Don was on board with us, and he dived the following day. He dived with Mike McDonald, who was the guy who organised the whole trip for us, and he was living in Sydney, and I was lucky enough to catch up with him a few years later. But yeah, they went down, and Don is an amazing guy to meet, and again, an absolute pleasure to meet him. Has some wonderful stories. Almost got to fly in the space shuttle, which is a real shame, given that he'd been as deep as you can get on the planet. To at least get into low Earth orbit would have been something else. I have a feeling that Buzz Aldrin has been down to the Titanic and obviously been to the moon. So in terms of absolute range of high and lows, that would give him the record for sure. But there you go. So look, that's really a taster. I've done a couple of podcasts. Obviously, I could talk a lot more about details of it, but the whole thing was an amazing experience to see a ship like that. And I will say that on that night, I got up around midnight, and I believe the Titanic hit the iceberg around midnight and sank at around 2:30. And I need to check that. I may have got that wrong. But as I say, it was a case of visiting a grave. I mean, it is still, a lot of people died there, and it must have been absolutely dreadful. I've never been in that situation, obviously, of having to face certain death. I've certainly had my share of brushes where I thought I might not get out of the situation, but this is one where you were not going to get out of it for sure. And so that evening that I did my dive, I walked out onto the fantail of the boat, the back of the ship, and just stood there for a while, looking at the stars, looking at the ocean, and thinking about what had happened all those years previously in that spot, and just tried to imagine, at least in some way, what those people were thinking, the people that didn't survive, what was going through their minds, their whole experience of it, the people who did survive, and what they saw, what they had to live with for the rest of their lives. So definitely an experience that I'm extremely pleased and fortunate to have had the opportunity to do, and very grateful that I did it. So I'm going to leave things there. I hope you've found this interesting. And if you'd like to know more about me and my photography, I do have a website, which is www.creativephotographyacademy.com. I'm primarily using that right now. I'm going to be changing things in a while, but that's my training stuff. But there's also, you'll find some other background material, and I think there's a particular picture of the Titanic, the bow section that I took on there as well. So whatever you're doing, I hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.
Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.